In this video, I'm going to share how to take 5 gimbal moves from basic to intermediate all the way to advanced. I'm not just going to show you how to do these moves, but also explain why, what lenses or focal length I recommend, and what your gimbal settings should be. For all these shots, I'm using the ZHIYUN Weebill 3S and the Sony a7S III. Number 1. The crane. A crane shot, or sometimes called a jib shot, works great for establishing a location or your character in that location. You can, for example, use it to show the audience where the next scene will take place. The basic crane shot starts with holding the camera low to the ground, and as the character steps into the environment, you pull the camera up while keeping it horizontal. I recommend shooting this on a wider focal length to show off more of your environment, something like a 24 or 35mm. Set the gimbal to lock mode to make sure that there is no tilt or pan movement while the camera moves up. You can make this shot more interesting by starting your movement from behind a foreground element. This will add more dynamic to your shot and puts more emphasis on the movement of the camera. In this particular situation, there was no foreground element directly behind the character, but I still wanted to have the shot end with the character and the path centered in the frame. So I moved the camera from the right, behind the bush, towards the middle of the frame. This horizontal movement combined with the vertical upwards movement makes this shot a lot more exciting. Here I'm using a 35mm and the gimbal is still set to lock mode. If you want to take this type of crane reveal shot to the next level, you can add even more movement to the shot. By combining other movements with the crane reveal in one seamless move, you can end up with a very dynamic shot. Here I started with a sidetrack with focus on the shoes while the character is walking. And at the right time, as the character turns to the right, I swing around towards the left and slowly pull up the camera, revealing the environment and more of the character. Starting at the character's shoes creates anticipation, because your audience doesn't see anything else of the environment or of the character. Then revealing both the environment and the character in one steady move results in a very dynamic shot. For these types of moves, I like to have the gimbal in inverted mode instead of using underslung mode, because it tends to give better results when the gimbal is set to follow mode. Number 2. The pullback. This shot is another way to reveal the environment or your character in that environment. And I think this can be a very powerful shot, so I'll show you 4 ways to spice up this type of camera movement and make it more dynamic. For the basic pull back move, you start with the camera close to your subject and slowly walk backwards. This puts the focus on your character and then slowly shows the audience the environment they're in. Here it also makes things more interesting by having the character turn around as the camera pulls back. This then both reveals the character's face and more of the environment. I shot this on a 35mm lens, but you can also shoot this on a wider focal length. Set the gimbal to lock mode because you don't want any tilt or pan movement. We can make the shot more interesting by starting the movement with an empty frame and then have the character step into frame as the camera continues to move backwards. This works great to show off your location and then surprise your audience by introducing the character as he walks into frame. This was again shot at 35mm with a gimbal set to lock mode. Let's make this shot super dynamic and pull the camera through something or past a foreground object. This will create a more dynamic movement and makes her a very engaging shot, especially because the camera is moving backwards. The audience doesn't know what's coming, and these little surprises keep the audience more entertained and intrigued in what's going on. Again, here seamlessly combining that pullback movement with a tracking movement as the character walks into the location, you end up with a very exciting looking shot. Anything from a wider 16 or 24mm to a 35mm works best for this type of shot. Have your gimbal set to follow mode so you can utilize both the pan and tilt motors to smoothly follow your character. Another great reveal shot can be achieved by starting your shot with the camera pointed up, ideally to a detail of your location. Then start walking backwards and slowly move the camera down to reveal your character and the rest of the environment. This again creates anticipation and intrigue in your shot, because your audience doesn't really know what to expect or what will happen. Having the gimbal set to follow mode allows you to do a smooth camera tilt down. And I prefer tilting like this instead of using the joystick and using the motors to perform the tilt movement. This was shot at 35mm but will also work at wider focal lengths. You can do a similar shot by starting with the camera pointing down, for example towards something your character might be doing. Then move backwards and slowly tilt your camera up to reveal more of your character and their environment. This can work great to include a detail of your character or what they're doing, and at the same time revealing more of your character and the location they're in, all in one seamless shot. This is definitely one of my favorites as it's a more unexpected camera move and it includes so much in one shot. I shot this at 35mm, but you can also use a wider focal length if you want. And for this type of shot, you would also want to have the gimbal set to follow mode. Moving on to number 3, the tracking shot. A tracking shot lets you capture movement and action in your scene. It's great to showcase progression and also allows your viewer to experience the scene from a dynamic perspective. This basic shot is what's called a side track. You simply walk beside your character, tracking them at eye level. You want to keep the gimbal steady without any pan or tilt movement, so make sure to set it to lock mode. This can again be shot on a number of different focal lengths, but I chose my trusty 35mm. One important compositional thing to keep in mind is to place your character in the left third of your frame if they're walking towards the right. This helps the viewer to follow the direction of the character across the frame, left to right. One way to make this shot more interesting is by adding extra movement. Start with the camera low to the ground and slowly bring the camera up to reveal the rest of your character. Move at the same pace as your character and try to keep them at the same position in your frame. Again, starting with a detail and slowly revealing more of your character creates tension and intrigue, which is what keeps your audience engaged. Set your gimbal to lock mode, and similar to the basic shot, you could use a variety of focal lengths for this type of shot. Let's take this shot to another level by making it even more dynamic. And if you've been paying close attention, you already know we can do this by adding and combining different movements. Start the shot low to the ground with the focus on the character's shoes. Then, while making a movement up, at the same time rotate around your character as you reveal more of the environment, the character, and the direction they are walking towards. This could also be a dynamic way to introduce a second character in your scene. As you rotate around your main character and open up your shot, you could have a second character enter the frame from here. Having the gimbal in inverted mode and set to follow mode works best for getting a smooth shot. It's definitely not easy to keep your character framed well throughout the shot, but with some trial and error, you can do it. Number 4, the orbit. The purpose of this shot is to reveal the environment around your character or to show the emotion of your character in their environment. It also works great as a hero shot. For the basic orbit shot, hold the camera at eye level towards your character. Then walk around your character, keeping them as much centered as possible. I like holding the Weebill 3S with the side handle for some extra stability. And for all these orbit shots, set your gimbal to pan follow mode. This will activate the panning motor, but keep the camera from tilting up or down. Let's make this shot a bit more epic by changing the angle of your camera. Hold the camera lower instead of at eye level and shoot up towards the character. This will amplify the hero effect and it makes your character seem bigger and more important. A critical thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you have something interesting behind your character. I changed the position of my character to make sure that these trees were behind him, instead of just a plain boring gray sky. In the previous shots, we've already seen how the use of foreground elements can create a more dynamic shot. And the same goes for placing something in the foreground while doing an orbit shot. Having something closer to the camera while moving will accentuate that motion of the camera. The objects in the foreground will move faster than the objects in the background, creating the so-called parallax effect. This becomes even more apparent when shooting the orbit shot on a longer focal length, like here on an 85mm. Moving further away from the character, thus allowing more objects between the camera and the character, like these different trees, and shooting at a longer focal length just makes this shot look super cinematic. Number 5, the push in or push forward. This move is used to bring you closer to something in the frame. It can also stress the importance of a character, their emotions, or what they're doing in the scene. This shot usually tends to build drama and suspense. For a basic push-in shot, you start with the camera further away and at eye level of your character. Then you move forward towards the character. This shot can work with a number of different focal lengths, but I used a 35mm. No panning or tilting is needed, so set the gimbal to lock mode. For a more dramatic push-in shot, hold the camera low to the ground and then push in towards your character. Then, once you're close enough, move the camera up towards the character's face. Moving close to the ground like this will make the movement more dramatic and give the illusion that you're moving much quicker than you actually are. This type of shot works best with a wider lens, so something like a 24 or 35mm. And since this is more of a crane movement up, I'm not using the tilt motor of the gimbal, so I left it in lock mode. A more smooth and cinematic way to do this type of push-in shot is by changing the gimbal to follow mode. This will allow you to do a smooth tilt movement. Start by holding the camera slightly lower and push forward towards your character. Then slowly tilt the camera up as you get closer to your character. For a more dynamic shot, you can have your character move their head up as you're tilting the camera. Similar to what we've seen before, changing the camera to a lower angle and shooting up makes the character feel more epic and important. I also shot this at 50 frames per second and slowed down the footage for a more epic feel. This shot works best at a longer focal length, something like an 85mm. Whichever gimbal move you end up using, the absolute most important thing to keep in mind is that it makes sense to the story you're trying to tell. With that being said, I want to make clear that the basic gimbal moves are not bad by any means. They can have a time and a place in your film, just like the intermediate and the advanced moves. Anyway, I hope you were able to learn something from this video, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!